Jimmy Kimmel thought it'd be just another night, another cheap shot at conservatives, another laugh track for the studio. But Karoline is different. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't trade insults. Karoline Leavitt simply sat across from Jimmy Kimmel and exposed, on national television, exactly what millions of Americans have been feeling for years, that the media isn't laughing with you. It's laughing at you. Kimmel tried to mock her. He tried to corner her with edited clips and cheap sarcasm, but Karoline didn't flinch. She fired back with real facts, real numbers, and the kind of quiet strength that doesn't need a spotlight to shine. And when she stood up, calmly removed her microphone and told him, "I don't need the stage to speak the truth," the entire studio fell silent. Because in that moment, it wasn't just late-night comedy under fire. It was the voice of forgotten America finally being heard. If you've ever felt silenced, mocked, or ignored for what you believe in, this is the moment you've been waiting for. Please like and subscribe. I will bring you surprising truths that American politicians are trying to hide. Jimmy Kimmel was in his comfort zone. The lights were hot, the music snappy, and the crowd eager to laugh, just like any other night. His writers had spent the afternoon crafting punchlines, rehearsing jabs, and preparing their latest late-night takedown of the political right. But what none of them expected was that their guest, Karoline Leavitt, wasn't there to play along. She wasn't a typical politician, nor a carefully scripted talking head. She was a force. And she was about to remind everyone, especially older Americans who'd felt ignored for years, that there's still such a thing as conviction, dignity, and backbone. Karoline stepped onto the stage wearing a bold red suit that seemed to glow under the studio lights. Her blonde hair was tucked back neatly, but her eyes burned with unmistakable fire. She wasn't smiling to please the cameras. She was walking into that room with purpose. Backstage staff whispered, glancing at her calm demeanor. A young producer muttered, "She doesn't look nervous." Another added, "She doesn't even look amused." She wasn't. She knew what the game was. Late-night TV wasn't about interviews anymore. It was about ambushes, about turning anyone with conservative values into a punchline. And that night, Jimmy Kimmel was expecting another easy win. As Karoline sat in the green room, she didn't scroll through her phone. She reviewed her talking points, adjusted her cufflinks, and breathed in deeply, calm, focused. She had spent the past 2 years speaking for the administration in rooms filled with skeptical press. She had faced down smirking journalists, combative reporters, and biased narratives. But this stage was different. Here, the audience had been trained to laugh before listening. Here, the facts were edited into punchlines. And here, the truth was often the first casualty. But Karoline wasn't afraid of confrontation. She'd been raised in a hardworking New Hampshire family. Her father ran a truck dealership. Her mother helped at a local church. Respect was earned. Words mattered. And truth wasn't optional. So, when her name was announced and she stepped out onto that stage, she wasn't performing. She was taking a stand. The crowd applauded as Jimmy Kimmel grinned, flashing that Hollywood smile that had skewered many politicians before. The camera panned across the audience, some clapping with excitement, others whispering judgments before Karoline even spoke a word. "Tonight," Jimmy began, "we have the youngest White House press secretary in history, here to explain what it's like to clean up after presidential tweet storms." Laughter echoed through the studio. Karoline didn't flinch. She sat with poise, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes steady on Jimmy's face. She waited. Let the joke land. Let the laughter settle. And then, calmly, she spoke. "I'm proud, Jimmy. Proud to serve the American people. Not just the ones who laugh from the sidelines, but the ones who clock in every morning, raise their families, and believe in something bigger than a punchline." The applause that followed was hesitant, but it was there. The energy in the room shifted, subtle, but undeniable. Jimmy tried to pivot. He leaned in, throwing another jab. "So what's it like being the face of the cleanup crew? I mean, with all due respect, it's gotta be exhausting defending every, let's say, creative statement your boss makes." Karoline smiled. "I'd rather defend someone fighting for American jobs than someone performing monologues for laughs." A murmur swept through the audience. Some clapped, some booed. Others just stared, processing. For the first time in a long while, a guest wasn't playing the game. She wasn't dancing for the applause. She was drawing a line. The camera zoomed in on Jimmy's face. His smile remained, but the confidence behind it began to waver. "Do you really think America's doing better?" he asked, the sarcasm coating every word. "Gas prices, inflation. You think families out there are applauding you for that?" Karoline leaned forward slightly, her voice never raised. "Jimmy, the challenges we face are global, but here's what we've done. We've brought 2.3 million jobs back to American soil. We've increased domestic energy production by 15%. We've lowered unemployment to historic levels. Those aren't opinions. Those are facts." Scattered applause broke out, and Jimmy, caught off guard, tried to pivot again. "But come on," he grinned. "Don't you ever get tired of spinning it? I mean, that's what you do, right? Spin?" Karoline didn't miss a beat. "No, that's what you do." The crowd gasped. She wasn't angry. She wasn't theatrical. She was composed. "Your team edits clips. You frame narratives. You joke your way through serious issues like national security, the economy, and faith. But the people I represent, they don't have the luxury of sarcasm. They have bills. They have jobs. They have families to feed." The studio fell quiet, and then came a different sound, respectful applause, the kind that comes not from agreement, but admiration. Jimmy leaned back in his chair. This wasn't going the way he'd planned. Behind the cameras, producers whispered, "She's not cracking. No soundbite yet. She's controlling the tone." They didn't realize. They weren't just filming an interview, they were filming a turning point. For viewers at home, especially seniors and working-class Americans, this moment wasn't just television. It was validation for the veterans who'd been mocked, for the grandmothers who'd been told they're out of touch, for the blue-collar dads who'd watched their towns hollowed out. Karoline was speaking for them, and she wasn't backing down. As part one came to a close, Jimmy tried one more jab. "Well," he said with a forced chuckle, "if nothing else, you're tough." Karoline smiled, not to please, but to warn. "You haven't seen tough yet." And just like that, the commercial break arrived. But everyone watching, both in the studio and across the country, knew something rare had just happened. Karoline Leavitt didn't just survive the ambush. She flipped the spotlight. The cameras cut back in. The crowd cheered, but the energy had shifted. Jimmy Kimmel adjusted his cuffs and smiled at the camera, but it wasn't the smile from 10 minutes ago. That one had swagger. This one had uncertainty. Karoline Leavitt sat calmly across from him, sipping water from a glass on the guest table. Not a hair out of place. Not a tremble in her voice. She'd just weathered the first wave of Hollywood mockery and made it look easy. "All right," Jimmy said, trying to reset the tone. "You've made your points, but let's get real. How do you explain 8% inflation, 30% higher gas prices, and interest rates that are squeezing seniors and families? Doesn't sound like a success story." The audience leaned forward. Karoline didn't blink. "You want real?" she said, her voice crisp and calm. "Here's real. Inflation didn't begin with us. Global supply chain chaos, oil dependency, and post-pandemic disruptions, those aren't excuses, Jimmy. They're facts. But here's another fact. Since we took office, U.S. manufacturing has seen the largest rebound since 1979. We've cut our dependence on foreign oil, brought jobs back from overseas, and protected Medicare from being gutted by the same politicians you used to mock. That's progress. That's protecting America." The applause returned, not from everyone, but louder than before. Jimmy tapped his notes, looking for a pivot. "Sure, you can toss around job stats, but people at home don't care about numbers. They care about how they feel at the pump, and right now, they're angry." Karoline's tone didn't change. "They should be. Angry that we let manufacturing leave this country for 30 years. Angry that elites profited while small towns collapsed. Angry that for too long, late-night shows laughed while Americans cried. But what we're doing now, it's not perfect. But it's a start, and I'd rather defend progress than mock it." A woman in the audience shouted, "Tell him, Karoline!" The crowd roared. Jimmy's pen tapped faster. He leaned in again, smile returning with an edge. Okay, tough talk. But aren't you just a mouthpiece? I mean, you're great at rehearsed talking points. But do you really believe what you're saying, or is this just politics?" Karoline's gaze didn't flinch. You think this is rehearsed? She asked, her tone almost amused. Try walking into the lion's den with an audience waiting to laugh and a host waiting to clip you. Try standing up for people who get told they're outdated, backward, or worse, irrelevant. This isn't politics, Jimmy. It's personal. The studio hushed. She continued. I've sat with single moms who can't afford daycare, veterans who are still waiting for care, factory workers who've lost 3 jobs in 5 years. You think I flew across the country to read from a script? I came here to tell the truth. The crowd erupted. Older viewers at home, the ones used to being brushed aside, felt seen. Kimmel tried again. He signaled the screen behind them. A video played, a clip from a recent White House press conference. Karoline was at the podium. It showed her pausing mid-sentence, checking notes. The audience chuckled. Bit of stage fright? Jimmy asked, his grin back. Karoline chuckled too, but hers was cooler, sharper. You had to cut 5 seconds of a pause to make a joke, she said. But you didn't play the part where I outlined 3.5% unemployment, lowest in 50 years. You didn't play the part where I talked about lowering prescription drug costs. That's what scares you, Jimmy. The full picture, not the clip. A standing ovation burst from the back of the crowd. Kimmel held up his hands, pretending to fan the flames. But it was clear, his control over the room was slipping. The next line was supposed to be the finisher. So, Jimmy said, voice tightening, do you really believe this president is fit to lead, or are you just here to defend the indefensible? Karoline stood. The audience fell into a hush. I believe in the people who elected him. I believe in the workers who finally feel heard. I believe in the seniors who've watched their savings evaporate and deserve someone fighting for their health care, not mocking it. I believe in the mom in Ohio, the trucker in Texas, the veteran in Florida. That's who I speak for. Not this stage, not the clicks, and not the ratings. She pulled the microphone from her blazer and laid it gently on the table. Gasps echoed. I don't need a spotlight to speak the truth, she said. I brought it with me. And with that, she walked off the set. The camera caught Jimmy's stunned face, and America watched. It didn't take long. Within minutes of Karoline Leavitt walking off that stage, video clips were flying across social media like sparks off a dry match. The moment she removed her microphone, looked Jimmy Kimmel in the eye and said, I brought the truth with me, had already become the most replayed moment on late-night television in years. Some shows are built to entertain. That night, history was broadcast. Back in the studio, there was stunned silence. Jimmy Kimmel shuffled his papers and muttered, well, I guess we'll be back after the break. But even he knew, the energy in the room wasn't coming back. The cameras cut, the music played, and backstage was chaos. Producers were yelling over headsets. Did we just lose control of the whole show? One of Jimmy's assistants whispered, she owned the moment. Another staffer, an older gentleman who'd been with the show for years, just nodded and said, we haven't seen someone like that in a long time. Outside the studio, a group of audience members waited in the lot. Some were still recording, whispering into their phones. She didn't just walk off, she walked through him. A veteran wearing a faded Air Force cap turned to his wife and said, she reminded me of someone who used to lead with purpose. And in homes across the country, from senior living rooms in Arizona to farms in Iowa, the story played on TV screens and phones like wildfire. Did you see her? She made him look like the clown he pretends to be. She didn't just defend the administration, she defended us. By morning, the clip had gone viral. On Twitter, hashtags like Shashanchasher, Karoline Clapback, discussing truth walks, and a mic drop moment were trending globally. A slow-motion video of her standing and walking off was set to a soundtrack of the national anthem by one user with the caption, she didn't shout, she didn't flinch, she just won. TikTok creators across the political spectrum jumped on the moment. Reaction videos poured in, some emotional, some astonished. Even younger Gen Z users, many of whom had never heard Karoline speak, started calling her a lion in a den of hyenas. Chiu, a clip of Jimmy's stunned face when she laid the mic down, hit 5 million views before lunch. Fox News called it the greatest moment of late-night TV in a generation. Newsmax ran the headline, Karoline Leavitt dismantles Hollywood bias in under 60 seconds. Even left-leaning outlets were forced to cover it. CNN ran a headline, Press Secretary walks off Kimmel interview, audience divided. Their article downplayed the impact, but social media didn't. And YouTube, reaction videos, analysis videos, podcasts, clip after clip, dissecting how Karoline didn't just answer questions, she controlled the room. Back at the White House, Karoline sat quietly in her office, sipping coffee, her phone buzzing nonstop. "Your walk-off has more engagement than the Super Bowl," one aide joked. She didn't gloat. She didn't grin. She simply said, "It's not about the walk-off. It's about what comes next." The press team had already drafted statements, but Karoline waved them off. "I've already said what I needed to say. The video speaks for itself." Later that day, during a White House press briefing, a reporter, half amused, half serious, asked, "Miss Leavitt, do you regret walking out on Jimmy Kimmel?" Karoline gave a small smile. "No," she said. "I walked off his stage because I don't need bright lights to tell the truth. I'll speak it anywhere, anytime." The room murmured. Even seasoned reporters leaned in. Within 24 hours, her social media followers tripled. Veteran groups issued statements of support. Retired military officers praised her courage. Moms in suburban Facebook groups called her the calm voice we've needed. And older Americans, those who'd been dismissed by the media for years, finally felt like someone had stood up for them on the biggest stage. One viral comment on Facebook said it best. "She wasn't fighting for attention. She was fighting for all of us who've been ignored, laughed at, or talked over. That wasn't a meltdown. That was leadership." Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel's next monologue fell flat. He tried to laugh it off. "Well, last night got interesting," he said, chuckling weakly. Karoline, or is it Karoline, brought a whole lot of energy to the set. But the audience didn't laugh the same way. The sting of being bested lingered. He made a half-hearted apology, thinly veiled in sarcasm, but the damage was done. Even among his usual crowd, people had questions. Why did she make more sense than he did? She came with data. He came with jokes. She was serious. He was playing. Behind the scenes, Jimmy's team was in crisis mode. Producers were shaken. PR managers were scrambling. Sponsorship deals were being reviewed. Not because Karoline made him look bad, but because she made him look irrelevant. By the end of the week, conservative media hailed Karoline as a modern-day Margaret Thatcher. Even moderate outlets had to admit she'd pulled off something rare. She didn't just survive a hostile interview, she flipped the narrative with grace, not outrage, with truth, not spin, and most importantly, without ever raising her voice. From living rooms to veterans' halls, from nursing homes to churches, Karoline's moment became a rallying cry. "She stood for us," they said. "She didn't take the bait. She reminded me of who we used to be." And slowly, quietly, power began to shift. Because in that one moment, Karoline Leavitt didn't just represent a president, she represented America's backbone. And now, the nation was listening. It wasn't just a moment, it was a cultural detonation. The morning after the walk-off, the air in Los Angeles felt different, at least inside the ABC studio that housed Jimmy Kimmel Live. The crew arrived early, heads low, eyes cautious. No one said it out loud, but the elephant in the room wasn't a joke. It was the silence left behind by Karoline Leavitt. In the editing suite, producers watched the footage again, and again. "We've never had someone flip the script like that," one muttered. "She didn't just survive, she won." One senior producer sighed. She took the show away from Jimmy, right in front of his own crowd. Meanwhile, marketing teams scrambled. Advertisers were calling, some intrigued, others nervous. A sponsor quietly pulled a commercial spot, citing audience polarization. But the analytics told the truth. Ratings for Karoline's segment were the highest in the show's history. But this wasn't just about numbers. This was about trust. In homes across America, especially in small towns, rural counties, and neighborhoods where late-night TV had long lost its appeal, people were tuning back in, but not to laugh. They were watching her. In a retirement community in Ohio, a group of veterans gathered around the TV again, not for football, for Karoline. "She had steel in her spine," said a former Marine. "She reminded me of Golda Meir," said a retired school teacher. "She didn't just answer back," someone added. "She brought the fire right to their door." Social media exploded again, not just with Gen Z edits and political takes, but with stories. Stories from ordinary Americans who had never posted publicly before. I'm 74. I haven't trusted a TV personality in decades, but that young woman made me proud. I grew up watching Walter Cronkite. I didn't expect to find truth on late night again. She stood there like my mother used to, straight-backed, no fear, all truth. Karoline had become more than a press secretary. She had become a symbol, not for youth, not for politics, but for resolve. At ABC headquarters, an emergency meeting was called. "We need a response," said one executive. "She made Jimmy look like a bully." "He tried to be clever," said another, "and she came with substance." "No one's mad she won," one intern muttered. "They're mad because she made us all look small." But behind closed doors, the real problem was this. Jimmy Kimmel hadn't lost an argument. He'd lost control of the national narrative. The laughter didn't land. The smugness didn't work. The audience didn't cheer. Not like they used to. Karoline, meanwhile, didn't tweet. She didn't gloat. She got on a flight and went back to work. At the next White House briefing, she stepped to the podium without notes. "I'll take your questions," she said calmly, "and I'll answer all of them, unlike what happens on comedy shows." The reporters chuckled nervously, but none interrupted her. Meanwhile, the ripple kept growing. Clips of her walk-off were now being played in civics classes. Fox News hosted a full segment titled "Mic Drop Heard Round the Nation." Newsmax branded her the Iron Lady of the New Right. But it wasn't just conservative outlets. The Wall Street Journal ran a weekend editorial, Truth Interrupted, how a young press secretary challenged late-night power. The Atlantic published a long-form essay, When Comedy Fails, What Karoline Leavitt Taught Us About Television. And local talk radio stations, those lifelines for rural and working-class voices, dedicated whole hours to callers, sharing where they were when they saw it. "I stood up in my living room and clapped," one caller said. "My wife cried." Another caller in Georgia said, "I'm a Democrat, but that girl, she's got grit, and I respect that." In the days that followed, something even more unexpected happened. Karoline received a letter, handwritten, from an elderly woman in Kansas, a Gold Star widow. It read, "I don't have a Twitter. I don't follow politics closely. But I watched you. And when you spoke, I saw my husband's courage in your face. He fought for the truth, and so did you. Thank you for reminding us that it's still alive." Karoline framed the letter and hung it in her office. Back in Los Angeles, Jimmy Kimmel tried to recover. He issued a follow-up monologue. "You know," he said, eyes squinting, "I never thought I'd get walked off on national TV by someone who wears more red than Santa Claus." A few chuckles, but nothing like before. He tried again the next night. "She brought her truth. I brought the jokes. Guess America decided which one they liked more." More chuckles. But still, the laughter had changed. Even his most loyal fans saw the shift. "She made him feel small," one Redditor wrote, "and she didn't have to be mean to do it." By the end of the week, political cartoonists across the country were drawing Karoline, not with mockery, but with reverence. One sketch showed her standing on a stage with the lights dimmed behind her, a microphone in one hand and a constitution in the other. The caption, "Truth doesn't need a script." On Sunday morning, churches across America were still talking. Pastors mentioned courage. Some mentioned Karoline. She didn't shout. She didn't run. She stood in the fire and left with her dignity. Older congregants nodded. They remembered a time when truth was spoken plainly. Now, they had hope again. What happened that night on Jimmy Kimmel Live wasn't just a TV highlight. It was a challenge to the culture, to the media, to the country. And the echo of that challenge was only growing louder. By Monday morning, something profound was in motion. Not in Washington, not in Hollywood, but in the hearts of ordinary Americans. Karoline's walk-off wasn't just a rebuttal to Jimmy Kimmel. It was a moment when many across the country, especially older generations, felt that someone had finally spoken for them, not at them. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about pride, dignity, the kind of silent strength that holds families together, that fights wars, that pays bills, that keeps the lights on long after the media spotlight has turned away. In places the media rarely visits, Karoline's name had become a badge of respect. In a small-town hardware store in Montana, two elderly men were watching the clip on an old iPad between coffee breaks. "She didn't blink," one said. "Reminded me of Reagan at the Berlin Wall." The other nodded. "Only sharper." At a church luncheon in Georgia, a woman in her 60s stood up, holding back tears. "She didn't back down. She made me believe again." What followed next wasn't staged. It wasn't choreographed. It was real. A retired Marine in Michigan started a grassroots movement called Mike Free America, encouraging citizens to speak their truth boldly without waiting for permission. It caught fire. Senior veterans organized town halls to discuss the media's mockery of traditional values. Churches began hosting truth nights, where people shared their stories of being silenced, until now. A 75-year-old widow in West Virginia stood at one and said, "My generation gave too much to be laughed at like we don't matter. Karoline reminded me we still do." Meanwhile, Karoline was back on the job. She continued her briefings, her tours, her work, unchanged by the fame. When asked in a CBS interview if she planned to run for office one day, she simply smiled and replied, "I'm not here to be famous. I'm here to be useful." The answer went viral. It was printed on t-shirts, shared across Facebook groups with captions like, "Now that's a public servant," and the mainstream media? They tried to move on. Some anchors mocked the obsession with a walk-off. Others tried to frame it as a performative stunt, but the public wasn't buying it. Because deep down, Americans recognized the difference between a stunt and a stand. This wasn't flash. It was a flashpoint. 1 week later, a bipartisan committee on media accountability was formed in Congress. At the hearing, Karoline was invited to testify. When she walked into the chamber, the room fell silent. She didn't bring a binder. She didn't read a speech. She stood behind the microphone and said simply, "Americans don't need filters. They don't need spin. They need truth. And they know what it sounds like when they hear it." Even her critics sat back. The chairperson closed the session by saying, "This may have started on a comedy show, but it ends with a reckoning." Outside Capitol Hill, crowds had gathered, not in protest, but in gratitude. Seniors, veterans, churchgoers, farmers, teachers, many holding handmade signs. "I don't need late night to speak for me." Karoline stood up. "So we could. Truth doesn't need applause." And then came the moment no one saw coming. Jimmy Kimmel appeared on his show a week after Karoline's walk-off. He stood center stage, without the band, without the opening joke, just him. "I've spent a lot of nights making people laugh," he said, "but some things aren't funny. I've thought about that moment all week, and while we may not agree politically, Karoline Leavitt reminded me that not everything needs to be a joke." A pause. "I don't know if I handled it right, but she handled herself with strength, and I respect that." It wasn't an apology, but it was an admission, and the audience gave a quiet, solemn applause. In that moment, something shifted again. A late-night host had acknowledged that truth still carries weight, even in an age of entertainment. Karoline's walk-off didn't just challenge Jimmy Kimmel, it challenged all of us to listen harder, to speak clearer, to stand taller. In a world trained to laugh before it thinks, Karoline reminded us that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is pause, speak the truth, and walk away. She gave a voice to the silenced. She gave courage to the dismissed. She reminded the country what conviction really looks like, and she did it without yelling, without rage, without asking for applause. So, if you believe in a country where the truth still matters, if you believe that dignity doesn't go out of style, if you believe that the forgotten deserve to be heard again, then this moment was for you. Subscribe now, because more voices like Karoline's are coming, and you won't want to miss a word.